gambling advertising. 50 academics recently called for badly needed restrictions on the promotion of gambling products. They drew attention especially to the unprecedented numbers of young people being exposed to gambling ads via the internet and television. And they concluded, it has become quite clear that the gambling products being offered and the ways in which they are promoted are harmful to individual and family health and damaging to national life. And reviewing the evidence, the Advertising Standards Authority accepted that some studies were robust enough to support a link between advertising and gambling behaviour. And my lords, the government's white paper itself points to research showing that gambling advertising and marketing leads to people starting to gamble more, and to recommence gambling. So with all this evidence, it's bizarre the government isn't taking more action. And unlike us, other countries don't seem to struggle with the evidence despite having far less of it. Ipsos and researcher Dr. Rossi have identified 496 published research papers about gambling marketing here, more than the combined number of similar ones in Belgium, the Netherlands, Italy and Spain. Yet on their evidence, they've chosen almost full bans on gambling advertising and sponsorship. So can the Minister just explain why the UK government's assessment of our evidence is so different from neighbouring countries with similar research findings? Does the Minister really believe there would be 1.3 million people classified as problem gamblers in the absence of gambling advertising? And our government frankly seems confused. In one breath, it says action isn't justified because there's little causal evidence linking advertising to harm, but in another breath, without causal evidence, it welcomes the removal of gambling logos on the front of football shirts as a harm reduction policy. The government's position simply doesn't make sense. But, my lords, the government has accepted that gambling-related harm should be treated as a public health issue. So it should be adopting the precautionary principle and, on the huge weight of evidence, taking greater action. And yet the Minister in the Commons said, if there is more evidence that proves advertising is causing harm, then we will look at it. So I hope the Minister can explain what more the government needs before it's going to act. I believe that a public health approach to gambling should lead to significant curbs on advertising and a ban on direct marketing, an end to inducements such as so-called free bets, and the removal of gambling sponsorship in sport. My lords, time doesn't permit detailing all that I think should be done. So, noting that estimates suggest that as many as 60,000 children suffer gambling harm, let me end with just one area where I believe urgent action is needed, so-called content marketing, which the Guardian headline recently described as sneaky media ads luring the young into gambling. Just one example will suffice. A social media post with the headline, "When the barman asks you if you want another one," is followed by a photograph of Liverpool manager Jurgen Klopp giving the thumbs up. That's all there is to it. This simple, humorous post was by Paddy Power, but there are literally hundreds of them using cartoons and famous people posted online by gambling companies all the time. In just one weekend, online gambling ads received 34 million views. Over half were content marketing. And research shows that such posts are particularly appealing to young people, and that followers of gambling companies' online posts are disproportionately young people. Yet the voluntary code governing advertising says advertisements should be clearly seen as such. Now, I've met with the ASA, which oversees the codes, and shown them numerous examples of content marketing which clearly breaches the code. So I hope the Minister will agree that the time has come for a complete review of the codes and their enforcement, and including deciding whether or not self-regulation really is the right approach. My Lords, it is worrying that so many young people know the names of gambling companies, follow gambling companies online, think gambling is part of growing up, and see gambling as part of the enjoyment of sport. My Lords, gambling advertising encourages more people to gamble and more people to develop gambling harms. The figures are alarming, as are the consequences to individuals and to our society. The threat to our children should be enough on its own to compel the government to act. No primary legislation is required, as the Gambling Act 2005 gives the Secretary of State all the power she needs to regulate gambling advertising as she sees fit. So my simple question is, will the government get on and do something?
Here, here. Well, good speech.
My Lords, may I start by thanking the noble Lord Foster of Bath for initiating this debate today, and to pay tribute to his tenacious pursuit of this particular subject. He and I have worked together for quite some time, and served on your Lordship's select committee on gambling harm a few years ago. I need to declare my own interests as the CEO of the Association of Conservative Clubs, where we have several hundred clubs throughout the UK, all of which play gaming machines, play bingo, have small-scale lotteries as well, and also as the chairman of the National Conservative Draws Society, an established society lottery with an income or turnover in excess of £1 million each year. Now, my Lords, we have been here before when we're speaking about gambling advertising and gambling harm, and we've talked before about how to protect children from the harm of advertising. I can recall discussing the subject of loot boxes back in 2016, which is still a subject which I'm sure will be mentioned today. The latest game is Fortnite, which I will say now is going to be the next loot box. We will be talking about Fortnite in a few months or years to come. But I would like, if I may, to speak today to address not just the point about that gambling advertising is too much. I think everybody here would know and agree that we see far too much gambling advertising now than we're used to. And if there's more gambling advertising, there's going to be more people who gamble. If there's going to be more people who gamble, then the 0.5% of people who have and suffer from gambling harm is going to increase. And the 0.9% of young people who suffer from gambling harm and have a gambling problem will also increase. And so the point I would like to make today, my Lords, is not the fact that gambling advertising is on the increase and that more people gamble as a result of that, but perhaps specifically to talk about one area that we might be able to help children who are suffering from gambling harm, having perhaps been exposed to too much gambling advertising. So problem gambling rises each year, advertising spend on gambling rises each year, and gambling among young people, that's ages under 18, even under 11 years of age in some cases, my Lords, is rising as well. And I read the Gambling Commission's 2023 report on young people and their gambling behaviour, attitudes and awareness. And it's an interesting section on young people gambling using their parents' account. And it said, and I quote, "Overall, young people were more likely to use their parents' or guardians' accounts for any type of online gambling with their permission, 6%, rather than without, 2%. When looking at specific gambling accounts, young people were more likely to have played national lottery games online with their parents' or guardians' permission, 5%, than without, 2%. And similarly, young people were more likely to have played on gambling websites or placed bets online with their parents' or guardians' permission, 5%, compared with those without, 2%. Now, my Lords, we can conclude, therefore, that some parents give permission for their children to gamble, and it is possible for children to gamble without their parents' or guardians' permission, meaning that some young people were playing via either their own accounts or hacking into their parents' accounts. Something has gone wrong here, my Lords, with security measures, and it should not be possible for a young person to gamble under either their own name and details, and it shouldn't be right that they do it under their parents' or guardians' accounts. I would suggest it may be a good idea to mandate a two-factor identification process to be put in place on all gambling online sites. so that if a child is trying to gamble without their parents' knowledge, their parents' mobile phones could be notified, and this process could deter the child to make it harder for them to get online. And secondly, could the industry do more to provide information and education about the dangers of gambling to children and parents alike? In terms of how this relates to marketing and advertising, I think that if a gambling operator has not got the correct safety measures in place to protect children from accessing their products, and this includes the National Lottery, then they should not be able to advertise their services, nor even operate until their product can be shown to be safe. My lords, we would shut down a bar if under 18-year-olds were to be found systematically slipping through and purchasing alcohol undetected. And I have to say, I don't really see the difference here at all. So, my lords, that might be something to think about. But perhaps we might just also touch on sometimes the mixed messages which we send about the sports personalities who are involved with the gambling industry. And at the same time, we're just about to wave off our team to France for the Olympic Games, which is almost solely supported by gambling through the National Lottery.
My Lords, I too want to thank the Noble Lord Foster for initiating this debate, but also for all of the work and commitment that he gives to tackling gambling harm. I too have got interest to declare. I am a trustee of Gamble Aware. I work with the Behavioural Insights team on their advisory group, and I'm also involved with Peers for Gambling Reform. My Lords, when I grew up, I had virtually no knowledge or recognition that gambling happened. No child or young person today would be able to say that. And recently published research commissioned by Gamble Aware shows that children and young people described their online spaces as saturated with gambling content being seen in their everyday activities, even if they weren't looking at supposed gambling sites. But gambling advertising and content from influencers and footballers were identified as a potential pathway to gambling and experienced by young people as that. And the bright and eye-catching nature of adverts drew children and young people in. A 14-year-old girl said, "It makes it look like a really fun activity that has no consequences outside of using or winning some money." And so for far too many children and young people, gambling has become normalised. It's simply part of on-day life. And if you ever go to a football match, as I do, you cannot escape the gambling adverts and the involvement of all of the spectators in either taking notice or decidedly trying not to take notice. But there is clear evidence now that this normalisation is a factor in people becoming addicted. The impact on children and young people is stark. Recall of gambling adverts among 13 to 25-year-olds is positively associated with frequently gambling. Those with the greatest exposure to adverts are 2.3 times more likely to experience problem gambling later in their lives. And marketing, there are now almost 4 times, it is almost 4 times more appealing to children and young people than it is to adults. So this is an issue that really hits children and young people. What should the government be doing? They certainly need more tougher restrictions in sport. There does need to be a stadium and a shirt ban, and the Sports Sponsorship Code of Conduct, which sports organisations say they've completed, the government should push them to publish that so that it can be scrutinised. The government should ban pre-watershed advertising. The Australians, the Germans, the Irish have done this. Why haven't we? That would be another way of just making sure children and young people didn't see quite as much advertising. And safer gambling messaging and signposting from operators that is evidence-based should also be pushed by the government. That is possible, that is available, and will be available to the government to really push the operators to do in the very near future. This morning we heard that more young people in this country drink, smoke and vape than in any other Western country. We could add gambling to that. This is a very serious issue, that we know that those sorts of addictions, and as I've said, the evidence shows that the more exposure as a child, the more likely addiction is likely to follow. Those addictions will blight the lives of these children and young people for the rest of their life. We cannot stand by and not say children should be supported to actually avoid those terrible addictions. The government has a responsibility that, quite honestly, they didn't meet in the white paper. I hope they will now do that.
Lords, it's a pleasure to follow the Noble Baroness, and I must start by apologising for my slightly late appearance in the chamber. I was on the also a member of the Select Committee that considered these issues now a few years back, and I'm also a member of Peers for Gambling Reform, which is led by the Noble Lord Foster, to whom I also wish to pay tribute, because he works tirelessly in seeking improvements in relation to these problems. Like the Noble Lord, I very much hope that the Noble Lord, the Minister, when he responds, will not be tempted to adopt the position that to some extent is taken in the White Paper, where it is said, I think naively, well, there is no hard evidence that gambling, advertising and marketing increases problem gambling. It's in the nature of things that absolutely conclusive evidence on that point will not be available. But the following propositions are not in doubt. First, the gambling industry spends well over £1 billion a year on advertising and marketing in this country. It was over 1.5 billion in 2017, and I would have a very large bet at very short odds that it's more now. Second, problem gamblers unquestionably provide a very substantial part of the profits made by the industry. As to that, see the committee's report and plenty of other material. Third, problem gamblers are more susceptible to gambling advertising than others. See an article published, a very learned and impressive article published by the Public Health Journal in February 2023. In all these circumstances, it is obviously correct to infer that the industry knows what it is spending its money on and why. Second, that gambling, advertising and marketing will increase gambling activity. And third, a significant part of the increase will involve problem gambling. In short, one simply has to follow the money. I've looked at some of the material that was very helpfully circulated by the House of Lords Library, which contains a number of studies and papers, etc., that have been prepared over the last 3 or 4 years. I was particularly struck by one paper that I'll mention in the time I have available, which was published by 2 academics at Bristol University, Rossi and Nairn, in 2021. That found, having considered evidence from 650 participants who were exposed to 24 gambling advertisements and also exposed by way of a control to other forms of advertisements not involving gambling, that found that gambling advertising is significantly more appealing to children and young persons than to adults. It found that in 2021, 45% of 11 to 17-year-olds see gambling advertising on social media at least once a week. About 25% see it every day. That was 3 years ago. use of and to some extent addiction to social media has not decreased since then. There are various further findings. I haven't got time to set them all out. One struck me in particular, and the Noble Lord Smith spoke to this in his address. There are many gambling advertisements that relate to e-sports gambling. Now, I doubt that many members of this House engage in e-sports, let alone engage in gambling on e-sports. E-sports are the professional competitive playing of computer games online, and there is, I found to my surprise, there is a huge amount of gambling on the playing of computer games online. And the authors of this report observe that this is a development almost entirely under the radar of public discourse and policy making. That's correct, and so far as I can see, there is nothing or almost nothing in the white paper about that. The authors of the paper make various recommendations, in particular, ban on e-sports advertising in relation to gambling, because that is targeted at children and young persons. Second, an expansion of the definition of young persons to 16 to 24. And third, arrangements to be made and to be enforced, which will involve gambling advertisements only being provided when users confirm that they recognise and want them. I haven't got time to say more about the paper or the other material that is available, but it all tends to suggest that, as other speakers have emphasised, there is a very, very real problem here. Two questions, if I may, for the Noble Lord, the Minister. Is there any good reason why the government, if it's prepared to make unlawful the purchase of cigarettes for a significant segment of the population, should not enforce an arrangement whereby gambling advertising has to do what cigarette advertising, when it was permitted, used to do, namely inform the potential user of the probable outcome, that is, that he or she will lose money.
My Lords, it's a pleasure to follow the Noble Lord, Lord Trevethan and Oaksey, and I think his final question and suggestion was a very pertinent and encouraging one. Like other Noble Lords, I thank the Noble Lord Foster of Bath for securing this debate, and indeed all the work the Noble Lord has done over many years on this issue. And I declare my position as a member of Peers for Gambling Reform. But I want to begin for a change with some positive good news. And this picks up something that the Noble Lord, Lord Foster mentioned, which is the ban on various forms of advertising that has come into place in Sheffield following a decision of the Council in March. This is a really great demonstration of the fact that campaigning works can make a difference. I know some of the people who've been campaigning for that in Sheffield over a significant period. And it's also a demonstration of the public desire to have healthier environments, healthy societies, which is what indeed this public health measure does. So this is a ban within the limits of the power of Sheffield Council, applying to authority-owned hoardings. It also covers, as well as gambling and betting products, short-term loans, alcoholic drinks, fossil fuel products, some breast and infant milk formulas, petrol, diesel and hybrid plug-in vehicles. So you can see the focus here on health. But I think one of the really important points to make is that, as the Director of Public Health in Sheffield, Greg Fell, said, this is not going to break our gambling harm epidemic. And it really is important to see that the public health sector sees this epidemic being there, but it does set an important direction of travel. But my direct question to the Noble Lord the Minister is, local councils, local communities are expressing a desire to see these gambling adverts and other harmful adverts out of their communities. Will the government, if it won't act centrally, I prefer it act centrally, but if it won't act centrally, will it actually allow local communities to make that decision for themselves, not just on the sites they control, but on all of the advertising sites within their communities? And I think the really important point to make here is how much this advertising is focused in poor and disadvantaged communities. In Sheffield, the group Ad-Free Cities found that 60% of the advertisements were in the poorest areas of the city, just 2% of the adverts were in the most affluent locations. And if you look around the country, more than 4 in 5 outdoor billboard adverts focused in the poorest areas of England and Wales. These are impacting negatively on people's lives, on the environment in those communities. Now, like other noble lords, I commend the library, as usual, for its excellent briefing. All of the evidence is that, aligned with a deluge of gambling advertising that we're all being exposed to, we are seeing a great rise in the problem of problem gambling. The new methodology from the Gambling Commission, we're talking about 2.5% problem gambler rate. That's more than 1 million people. This is an addiction problem, a public health crisis. The GamCare helpline, more than 52,000 calls and online chats in 2023, up 24% in the previous year. Now, other noble lords have referred to the situation of football, and I again want to refer to the fact that there is a strong, fast-rising grassroots campaign saying we want something to be done about this. As far as I've been able to discover, AFC Wimbledon was the last club to join the Big Step campaign, calling for an end to all gambling advertising in football. Now, that campaign is part of Gambling with Lives, the charities set up by families bereaved by gambling-related suicide. And I don't think anyone's said this figure yet, but I really do think it needs to be recorded here. The government's own estimate is there are 496 suicides related to problem gambling every year. And just thinking about how much people are suffering, one figure, in the first weekend of the Premier League last August, fans were subjected to 11,000 gambling adverts. And I just want to take a moment to put this in the broader context. We have an epidemic of problem advertising. And just figures out this morning from the WHO shows that the UK has the worst rate of child alcohol abuse worldwide. We have a real problem where advertising is creating an unhealthy society. We need a much healthier society. That's something that the government itself will often acknowledge. Gambling is part of a much broader problem. There is no right to advertise. We have a right to say as a society, we don't want to force unhealthy products on people and communities.
My Lords, I echo others' thanks to the Noble Lord, Lord Foster, for securing this debate and also for his work alongside the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of St Albans, with others on Peers for Gambling Reform, campaigning tirelessly for this reform over the past several years. And while the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of St Albans, can't be in this place today to add his voice, I'm sure I echo the sentiments of all members when I say we look forward to welcome him back very soon to be able to add weight to this conversation. My Lords, we've heard this afternoon that the link between problem gambling and serious harm is well documented. Not only the financial impact of gambling addiction, which may on its own drive individuals with large gambling debts into theft, fraud, other forms of criminal activity, but also impacts on relationships, on work, at school, serious harm to both physical and mental health. Public Health England identified problem gamblers as at greater risk of dying from any cause and significantly increased risk of dying from suicide, as we've so eloquently just heard. These consequences, as well as having impact on those individuals, all lead also to indirect harms to children in those households. So I welcome the government's response to the committee's second report on gambling regulation, particularly the commitment to use funds from the levy to commission independent research around gambling and gambling-related harms. However, I'd want to echo the committee's calls for this research to be undertaken urgently, and specifically on the link between gambling advertising and gambling harm for children, and would ask for a commitment and a timeline to address that recommendation. Research by Gamble Aware released this month makes clear that children and young people are exposed to high level of gambling advertising, particularly online. And while we've heard that this link has not been proven to be causal, we have heard about the research undertaken that finds that about 34% of those who bet in the UK themselves allow to being influenced by advertising, with over 15% claiming that ads cause them to increase their gambling, and a similar percentage said that viewing ads resulted in them taking up gambling again after a break. But my lords, gambling reform is not my particular area of expertise, but I have done a significant amount of work over the course of my ministry with at-risk children and young people, and currently as Vice Chair of the Children's Society. So Ofcom's most recent report finding that around a quarter of 5 to 7-year-olds own a smartphone, with nearly a third using social media unsupervised, caused me great concern. We know our children are increasingly online, and we need to ensure that we're keeping pace with what is a rapidly evolving online landscape to protect our young people, our children, from harm. New technologies are significantly increasing exposure to advertisement, sponsorship, marketing, and our current codes must be updated urgently to reflect this. Social media forms a huge part of the gambling industry's advertising practices. I was really shocked to read recently that 92% of content marketing ads sent by major gambling brands were not obviously identifiable as advertising. That particularly impacts children. My lords, I too would like to close with an example illustrating that current guidance to protect children and young people simply isn't fit for purpose. As recently as a few weeks ago, a gambling firm was promoting a game on social media marketed with 3 cartoon frogs. Now, taking a dip with the ribbiting rascals might appeal to some adults, but it would also almost certainly appeal more to children. Such advertising should not be allowed.
My lords, I start with a small confession. I live in the village of Lambourne, which is the centre of the racing industry. If there ever was an industry that is linked to gambling, it is racing. But, my lords, I then made me think about what is my reaction to gambling. That's the fact that I don't sit on horses and do not gamble very much. My lords, it is the fact it is a day out when you're having drinks in a nicely dressed up environment watching racing. Virtually everything we are talking about today does not apply to that scenario. Everything we're talking about today is about casually watching something on a screen, either the one in our pockets, which I've just remembered to make sure is switched off, or it's something on a TV screen, or it's a screen at home. And the fact of the matter is that that device in our pocket means we can gamble at virtually any time. You only have to be conscious to gamble on that. So we have a totally different situation to the one to which I was originally relating to the gambling experience. It is a private activity. We know that the constant hits do lead to addiction, so we have got a situation of how do we control this, how do we limit it, how do we limit the inevitable damage in a few cases to those few cases, my lords, because that's effectively what we're talking about here. Also the case, as has been mentioned by many other people here, the fact that children have always been, witty advertising lives with the young, even if you didn't apply it. How many witty smoking adverts do we all come up with? Quite creative, fun things, running jokes. The silk cut advert. You even waited and thought, even as a non-smoker, oh, what's the next joke? They buy you buy in. It's very easy to do. Some people take the biscuit, some don't. But the fact of the matter is the amount of money that is spent on advertising by somebody clearly means that the providers of this service see the link. And as they're not going bankrupt at a rate of knots, one assumes they know what they're talking about. What are the government going to do about making sure it is difficult for people to access gambling services? We've had suggestions, and Lord Smith, more difficult identification process is going through a very good idea about the fact that actually, and a warning saying, the person who's guaranteed to make money on your bet is the bookie. I think will be something that actually is a very creative idea, and I hope that we'll be running with it. My Lords, what is government doing in a systematic manner to make sure that children have more problem getting access to this? If the parents actively help them, we may have more problems still, but what are they actively doing? And what are we doing to make sure that the places where the young, particularly, and going up to about 24 might be a good idea here, aren't going to see these by accident? And that is probably the principal objective here. Are you going to see these witty, well-placed little adverts by accident? Are they something you take on board? Late night TV, now you cannot. If you watch anything that crosses a watershed zone, you find yourself being subjected to advertising gambling. Not subjected, and that's probably wrong because you can always switch off. But it's there. It's there it's always going to be around. It's always there. What are we going to do to make sure it doesn't happen? My Lords, finally, when it comes to sports and the big stadiums, if the Premiership are starting to take it off their jerseys, as jersey shirts, depending on what we're going to call them, why aren't government encouraging everyone to remove these over a period of time? There's always a run-in, but all professional clubs, let's face it, we are proving to sport generally, and the biggest sport of all, that government will intervene eventually. An encouragement to make sure we are removing this advertising, or at least controlling it, within the stadium and on the players' bodies would seem to be a reasonable step. We can give them some warning, but we can reduce it. If it's going to be in the director's box, maybe fine, but it doesn't have to be on the side of the pitch. Can we make sure that there is some vision and thought pattern about restricting this? Because at the moment, there doesn't seem to be a coherent one, and I look forward to seeing how that's going to change.
My Lords, I join with others in thanking the Noble Lord Foster for bringing forward this topic for short debate. It's very timely, and he is an indefatigable campaigner on this issue. It's often said we all like a flutter, and it's probably true, though you'd struggle to get me buying more than a raffle ticket. For most who choose to take part, it is an enjoyable and harmless activity, but at its extreme, gambling can be addictive, damaging to family life, relationships, personal, mental and physical health, and can be life-destroying. I'm sure pretty much all of us will have come across people in our lives who've got a gambling problem or who have been impacted by gambling problems. I know I have, and it was sad and tragic to see. The DCMS Select Committee reported last year that around 1/3 people experience problem gambling, and it is likely that many more suffer gambling-related harm. The Library briefing for this debate, based on updated Gambling Commission data, estimates that it may well be over 1 million. GamCare reports that the number of people seeking help for gambling-related harms is increasing. In the year to January 2024, requests for help rose by 24%, and the NHS is reporting increased demand for its gambling clinics, and this is before we consider those who are struggling but don't feel able to ask for help. I want to focus briefly on the need for better research. The DCMS Select Committee, in their inquiry into the Gambling White Paper, recommended that there is an urgent need to better understand the effects of gambling advertising on the risk of harm. They found that the White Paper, while the White Paper produced existing evidence base did not show a causative link between gambling, advertising and harm, it seems clear that advertising encourages participation in gambling and that this effect is more pronounced for children and those vulnerable to gambling harm. It is the case that the activity of the gambling industry clearly suggests that they believe that advertising is a driver of interest and support for gambling. In 2018, Regulus Partners reported that investment in marketing increased between 2014 and 2017 from £1 billion to £1.5 billion, roughly 10% of the industry's £13.8 billion revenue. Much of it targeted now to gamblers online. The Select Committee recommended that the government must commission independent longitudinal research on the link between gambling advertising and the risk of gambling harm, including specifically looking at the impact on children. My Lords, this needs to be a focus of the funding made available by the statutory levy. I have two questions for the Government Minister. In their response to the Select Committee published last week, the Government stated that levy funding will be directed towards independent research on gambling and gambling-related harms, which, and I quote, could include further advertising-related research. Can the Minister confirm to the House today that levy funding will be directed at research on the link between advertising and gambling harms, particularly in relation to children? And secondly, and I'm sure the Minister must be expecting this, when can we expect the Government to publish their consultation on the statutory levy? The response to the Select Committee gives little away when it states that we should expect in the coming weeks. My Lords, sport is another key issue here. Many noble lords have spoken of this. It's a huge part of our national life, our family life, and something which children are exposed to and enjoy alongside older family members. Alongside welcome and effective measures including the whistle-to-whistle ban and plans for gambling sponsorship to be removed from the front of players' kits, that the Minister will be aware of the concerns raised over the amount of gambling advertising which young viewers are still exposed to during sporting events and which they cannot opt out of. So it's welcome that the Central Cross-Sport Gambling Sponsorship Code of Conduct has been finalised and that one of the four core principles is the protection of children and other vulnerable people. I must ask the Noble Lord, the Central Code has been finalised, but can the Noble Lord, the Minister, confirm if it's been published so it can be accessed by parliamentarians and sports fans? Some, of course, of us are both. And can the Minister give an update on when we might expect individual sports to publish their bespoke versions of the code? And can the Noble Lord, the Minister, tell us if the Government is alive to the VIP managed clients who now generate some 83% of gambling companies' profits with their direct online marketing techniques? One of the core principles of the code, by the way, is that gambling promotion will be socially responsible. Can the Minister tell us more about what that looks like? And finally, my Lords, we welcome the ongoing work on delivering the White Paper. This is an area on which there is a sizable amount of activity and considerable consensus. What members of this House are seeking to do is to ensure that that activity is focused, is delivered at pace, and that no crucial issues are allowed to fall through the gaps.
Well, my Lords, I too thank the Noble Lord, Lord Foster of Bath, for initiating today's debate and for the way he opened it this afternoon. I had the pleasure of working with him and a number of Noble Lords who've taken part in today's debate on the Select Committee, which he mentioned before I became a Minister at DCMS. So thank him for his tenacity in this area. The Government recognises the concerns that he and many other Noble Lords have raised about the impact of gambling advertising, particularly regarding its impact on children. The debate about advertising reflects really the balance that we're aiming to strike with our vision for the gambling sector more broadly. Regulating an innovative and responsible gambling industry on the one hand, and fulfilling the duty of government to protect children and the public more widely from gambling-related harm on the other. That is why, as part of our review of the Gambling Act 2005, we took an exhaustive look at the best available evidence. We certainly are not dismissive of evidence. On the contrary, we've sought to take an evidence-based approach, and the white paper that we published in April last year includes a robust, balanced package of reforms to prevent and minimise the risks of gambling-related harm. Since the implementation of the Gambling Act under the last Labour government nearly 20 years ago, gambling advertising, marketing and sponsorship has become more visible and widespread, and we've seen a visible integration of gambling advertising within sport. While this continual growth has not resulted in an increase in gambling participation rates or in population problem gambling rates, which have remained broadly stable for roughly 2 decades, it is important that there are a range of robust protections on advertising in place to ensure that it doesn't exacerbate harm. The rules on gambling advertising are set by the Committees of Advertising Practice, which operators must follow. A wide range of provisions in the codes are specifically designed to protect children and vulnerable adults. Compliance with these codes are a condition of Gambling Commission licences, and the Commission can and does take action with regard to adverts that are in breach of the codes. Furthermore, the industry code for socially responsible advertising includes a television watershed on all gambling products apart from bingo and lotteries. Children's exposure to gambling advertising on broadcast television is declining. The industry's whistle-to-whistle ban has cut the number of pre-9 p.m. betting adverts to around a quarter of their previous level, and further cut the average number of sports betting adverts seen by children to 0.3 per week.
Pre-watershed. I was in too much of a hurry to keep in the 5 minutes. Sorry.
I'm grateful to the noble lady, and I hope what I've said is nonetheless helpful in relation to the points that she raised in her speech, which I welcome. But we do recognise that there is good evidence to show that gambling advertising can have a disproportionate impact on those who are already experiencing problems with their gambling, and that some aggressive marketing practices are particularly associated with harm. The Noble Lord Trevethan and Oaksey mentioned a study which reflects that. And evidence from the Gambling Commission shows that 35% of problem gamblers received incentives of offers to gamble daily, compared to 4% of non-problem gamblers. Furthermore, while 10% of gamblers with a non-problem or low-risk score, according to the Problem Gambling Severity Index, were influenced to gamble more by direct marketing, this rose to 41% amongst those with a moderate risk or problem gambler score. We also recognise that content often used in gambling advertising can inappropriately appeal to children and young people. The Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Derby, raised such an instance. That is why we have introduced a suite of measures further to prevent potentially harmful impacts of advertising, specifically for children. Since October 2022, advertising rules have been strengthened to prohibit content which downplays risk or overstates skill involved in betting. The rules also ban content which is likely to be of strong appeal to children, and I will raise the frog-based example the Right Reverend Prelate gave with officials in that regard. As a result of this ban, top-flight footballers or celebrities who are popular with children are banned from being in gambling adverts. In line with the existing gambling advertising rules, the Premier League's decision to ban front-of-shirt sponsorship by gambling firms will commence by the end of the 2025-6 season, breaking the direct association between gambling brands and popular players. The Noble Lord Trevethan and Oaksey suggest that there should be warnings to potential players on gambling adverts. Robust rules from the Advertising Standards Authority prevent content and adverts which, for instance, promote gambling as a route to financial success. Adverts on television must direct people to support services that are available, but we're also working with the Department for Health and Social Care and the Gambling Commission to develop independent information campaigns about the risks of gambling, taking that out of the hands of the industry itself.
Apologise for interrupting him, but I really find it very difficult. He stands at the dispatch box and talks about all of these rules when I gave a very specific example of a Paddy Power advertisement, although it's not called an advertisement, that simply had a large photograph of the manager of Liverpool, Jurgen Klopp. Does he believe that that was a correct thing for Paddy Power to have done, and should it have been banned?
Well, as with the case that the Right Reverend Prelate raised, I will take that up with officials. But I'm spelling out some of the actions, some of which is still to come in. As I say, the rules that the Premier League are doing by the end of the forthcoming season. So I'm sure the Noble Lord will reflect that some of the work has been done and some of it is coming in shortly. But I will raise the case he mentions with the team at the department. And as we set out in our white paper, we're also working closely with the Gambling Commission to take targeted action on advertising to ban harmful practices and ensure that it remains socially responsible wherever it appears. The Commission has recently consulted on new rules to give consumers more control over direct gambling marketing that they wish to receive, and on strengthened protections to ensure that free bets and bonuses are constructed in a way which doesn't encourage excessive or harmful gambling. The Commission will set out its responses to these consultations soon. Together, these measures will empower customers and prohibit harmful marketing practices to prevent the risk of gambling harms. The Noble Lady Baroness Bennett of Manor Castle referred to the powers that are available to local authorities. As she reflected, these vary from local authority to local authority, but as we heard in the debate, the Metro Mayors who have the power in London and Manchester are using the powers that are available to them. And to prevent gambling-related harm effectively, there is no single intervention that provides the answer. That's why we've taken an holistic approach, which includes action on products and protections for players. We recently announced the introduction of stake limits for online slot games, where we've seen evidence of elevated levels of harmful gambling. And we are pursuing broader protections, such as financial risk checks, which will require online operators to identify and take action in relation to customers who are financially vulnerable. That will prevent runaway losses, which we are still seeing happen too often. The government is clear that effective and innovative collaboration to get the right mixture of interventions for the population as a whole, as well as those with specific needs or vulnerabilities, is required to tackle gambling harm. A key part of that approach is the government's decision to introduce a statutory levy, which I know has been a long-standing priority for the Noble Lord Foster, which the Noble Lord Bassam and others raised. Lord Foster, in his opening remarks, dwelt on the importance of evidence, and perhaps I should end my remarks by acknowledging that further work is needed to build the evidence base to ensure that policy and regulation is able to deal with emerging issues, and also making clear, in response to the contribution from the Noble Lord Bassam, that developing quality evidence is a priority for our statutory levy. Through the levy, increased and ring-fenced funding will be directed towards high-quality independent research into gambling and gambling-related harms, including in relation to advertising. We will continue to monitor the evidence base, and if new evidence suggests that we need to go further, then we will look at this again. The government will also be responding to its bespoke consultation on the levy and will set out its final decisions soon. So I thank the Noble Lord, Lord Foster, soon, very soon. I thank the Noble Lord, Lord Foster of Bath for tabling today's debate and all those who've spoken in it, and I'm certain we will return to this topic again ere long.
My Lords, questions on a statement made in the House of Commons yesterday on defence spending.
May I remind your Lordship's House of my register of interest and specifically my associations with the Royal Navy. My Lords, as my friend, the Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey said in the other place yesterday, there is much to welcome in this statement, and any and all commitments of additional resource for our national security will receive cross-party support. It is clear that we live in an increasingly dangerous world. Our dedicated and professional service personnel are operating in multiple theatres, securing UK interests and supporting our partners. Every day we ask more of them and their families, asking them to make sacrifices so that the rest of us remain safe and secure at home. So these benches welcome the new commitments to build up stockpiles, boost defence exports, give priority to domestic defence production and set up a new strategic headquarters in MOD. All commitments the Labour Party have been calling for months. It is welcome to see the government listening to the arguments made by the opposition. I also want to take a moment to applaud the additional support for Ukraine, both announced here and in the US. Their fight is our fight. My Lords, a fortnight ago, Sir Keir Starmer, the leader of the opposition, when confirming our cast iron commitment to the deterrent, made our position clear. A future Labour government will have a fully funded plan to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence. So our aspiration is the same as the government's. And as always, there should be no political point scoring on matters of national security and defence. What there should be, what there must be, is the opposition holding the government to account for their policies and their competence. So on that note, I hope the Noble Elder Minister can assist your Lordship's House in answering questions that the Secretary of State struggled to do so in the other place yesterday. Where is the fully costed plan to get us to 2.5% by 2030? Only a matter of weeks ago, His Majesty's Government presented and passed a budget. The Associated Red Book made it clear that the Government was planning to cut real-term spending on defence by over £2.5 billion in this financial year. So where is the additional money coming from, and why didn't it feature in last month's budget? The Secretary of State keeps referring to page 20 of this Defending Britain policy paper, which was launched yesterday. My Lords, the annex on page 20 does not outline where the money is coming from. It does, however,